Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Divergent Vibes podcast. A little bit different today because we're online, so I'm going to go between like looking at my camera and trying to be, and then looking at Beth. So that yeah, um, yeah, today I'm joined by the lovely Beth Thomas. So Beth, is there anything that hi first, and is there anything you'd like to say in way of introducing yourself?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be delighted to. Thank you, first and foremost, by the way, for having me on. We had a bit of distance to try and cover, so we went for the online option. So thank you also to your listeners for their patience with that one. My name's Beth. I like to call myself broadly a neuro inclusion specialist, which is essentially a fancy word for making sure that absolutely everyone, no matter how they think, feel, and process this world, has a space in which they can thrive and not just survive, because it would be quite nice if we didn't have to just keep surviving and coping, wouldn't it? And I do that through a variety of different services. So I'm a professional speaker, I am a certified ADHD life coach, and I'm also a workplace trainer and consultant. I'm also currently undergoing the CPD accreditation process for my structured training and speaking.
Awesome. Well, it's lovely to meet you again because we've spoken before. And also, just before we started recording, Beth popped to get some water, and I noticed that you have a friend behind you who now has disappeared. But maybe they'll come back and we'll
One,
meet.
yes,
meet.
absolutely. You might have met my very intrusive, absolutely wonderful rescue Dobie. His name is Aslan. He loves getting involved. He has no sense of personal space, and he will try to live inside your skin if you let him.
I mean, that's great. So maybe, hopefully,
I mean,
we'll meet.
when they said that the Doberman breed is sort of they call them a Velcro dog, I thought, yeah, I've grown up with dogs. That's fine. That's nothing I'm not used to. Oh my goodness, they really weren't kidding. He enjoys being as close to you as humanly possible for as long as humanly possible, which sometimes means on top of you. So I've lost count of the amount of times that he's managed to wind me because he just doesn't quite know his own strength.
Yeah, yeah, it's nice. But I mean, I mean, I could talk about dogs all day, but that's not um the topic we're going to talk about. So, yeah, Beth, what would you like to talk about today?
I'm glad you asked me. And when I was thinking about this, I thought, gosh, there's so many different directions that we could go in, and I imagine we probably end up doing that anyway. So I thought, how about starting with a topic that I know comes up, I'm going to say probably in the top three themes to explore in the one-to-one work that I do. So I work predominantly with late identifying and late diagnosed neurodivergent professionals. So they can work in a variety of different occupations, roles, careers, that sort of thing. And one of the things I notice seems to traverse every single background, culture, job role, industry, environment, you name it, is something called RSD, which stands for rejection sensitive dysphoria, if you're not aware of that. So I thought that might be a really useful place to start. What do you think?
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, and so do you want to give a brief summary, from your understanding of what RSD what it is for anyone who is like, what is that? I've never
Yeah,
heard that before.
yeah, for sure. And that is a question I hear often. What is that? What does it mean? Tell me the things. So I'd be glad to. So RSD, otherwise known as rejection sensitive dysphoria, it's not actually a clinically diagnosable condition yet. And it's not even in the diagnostic criteria for things like adult ADHD and autism, which I find quite baffling when we look at the overlaps and the prevalence of the experience. So, because it's obviously not a sort of condition in and of itself, it's not something you can be diagnosed with.
Mm.
However, anecdotal, so sort of informal observations and reviews and overviews and things suggest that up to 99% of neurodivergent adults experience it, particularly those with ADHD. And I find it absolutely wild to think something that might impact so many people, especially when we get into actually what it is, which we will in a moment, is not something that's really widely recognized
Mm.
within the sort of assessment, diagnostic, and support pathways that tend to traditionally exist at the moment, which kind of leaves me thinking, if this is something that is affecting everybody on a daily basis, and it's quite devastating to some people, yet it's not really being picked up on, what kind of an impact is that going to continue having when it doesn't
Mm.
need to? So I generally describe rejection sensitive dysphoria as a learnt response. So it is and I'm going to say this very loosely with those kind of fingery quotation marks, right? Because they describe it as a disproportionate, and I'll explain why I kind of use that term loosely, reaction to real and perceived rejection, criticism, judgment, ridicule, embarrassment. And it's really important that we also recognize it's both real and perceived, because a lot of people who experience RSD may find that this sort of signs of it get flared up, even if they've not actually experienced sort of outright rejection. It might really be the premise, the possibility of that that is enough to trigger a response. And that can be really, really painful to have to move through. One of the reasons that it can be so painful and so intense, so actually there's lots of different reasons when we really think about it, but one of those big reasons is because the same regions of our brain are fired up with emotional and physical pain, which means
Mm.
that from a sort of physiological perspective, and I'm making these largely simplified here, so feel welcome to come in with your expertise and add some extra context. But I'm very, very, grossly simplifying some quite complex experiences and terms. But essentially, those who experience it will have the same regions of their brain activated as if they were feeling physical pain versus emotional pain, which is why something like that perceived rejection can feel like a stab in the heart or a punch in the gut, or something really, really physical and painful. Many neurodivergent people also have hypersensitive nervous systems, which can intensify that experience. If we're hypersensitive, then we're feeling things much more intensely, which can include those experiences around rejection. And I think there's also that cultural layer as well. You're sort of very much expected to be able to regulate your emotions and handle criticism. And let's face it, in most cases, outright gaslighting and dismissal of people's experiences and emotions and thoughts and feelings. And so when we're growing up, not realizing that we're allowed to validate our feelings and our thoughts, we don't have safe spaces in which to exist authentically as ourselves. And so we're probably masking a lot, which is energy draining and demanding. Then we're expected to show up as a sort of slightly augmented version of ourselves to be more palatable or more acceptable or more
Mm.
convenient and tolerable for other people. We're going to really internalize a lot of those experiences. And when we then start thinking about all of that in sort of conjunction with RSD, they actually all start to make quite a bit of sense, right? And so when I said disproportionate earlier, the reason I said it so loosely is because if you think about it from your nervous system is responding exactly as it should be. It's responding to what it believes is a genuine threat.
Yeah.
Now, it may be that in reality, two things can be true at once. And so your body is responding to something completely as it's designed to, and there just might be a little bit lost in translation in the middle in terms of what's actually happening in front of us. There's so much more I could say, but I realize I'm just info dumping you on this point. So I'm just going to pause right there before I kind of keep going and going and check
Yeah.
it with you first.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you. And thanks for the summary. And as you were speaking, lots of thoughts. So but I think actually emotional regulation generally is something that I think we are understanding more and more is such a big thing in neurodivergence, autism, ADHD. Um, and it's something when I work with people, we're so much we're talking about nervous system and emotional regulation and being dysregulated, and I think there is an increased like sensitivity to that, and that's why hormones becomes so disruptive for so many individuals who are neurodivergent because you're trying to regulate and then you've got something changing in your system. Um, so I think just generally that is something that is not understood as much in the diagnostic criteria, and so then with RSD as well. And I was also thinking when you're disproportionate and thinking about therapy and individuals in therapy, and often, particularly I think with CBT, people can have a really negative experience. And I deliver some CBT, and there are some elements of it actually that can be really helpful for a neurodivergent mind. Being really explicit about this is what we're doing, and this is how it works, and this is and like let's check in. And but if you are using a system where you're going, well, oh, that's a cognitive distortion. That's not accurate, and not kind of going, well, what is the real lived experience of being neurodivergent, and actually what is the reality of what your nervous system is doing? And so I think that is where some of the that challenge is, and where people might go, doesn't work for me at all, because if we're trying to just go, well, let's just change your thinking to make it okay, actually there might be a real experience of your body and your nervous system that's going, no, this is dangerous, this is a threat, this is, and that's something from my personal experience. I get some RSD and have that of going like, oh, my nervous system is not enjoying this experience. And actually you have to really um I don't know, like understand that and accept that, because you can't like think it away, you know?
Acceptance and self-compassion are two of the most powerful tools, in my opinion, that things like coaching, therapy, other support services can help an individual to develop their
Mm,
skills, right? And we have to practice that skill in order to be able to develop it, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. And I work with a lot of people who are sort of, quite deep into their adulthood, be it, careers, families, etc. And the amount of shame and embarrassment and fear and discomfort that so many people experience around trying to have some of these conversations and put themselves into those spaces where they can learn the things that they don't know is immense, because they often think, well, I should know this by now, or I should have fixed this, or I should be better at this, etc.
mm,
And I think what you've said there in terms of that acceptance and compassion piece is so, so important, because without those pieces, I mean, again, my opinion, I don't have any empirical proof to back this up, but in my opinion, if we don't have those pieces, the scope of what we can achieve in something like a therapeutic journey is limited,
mm,
because you're still challenging whether or not you deserve to access it, or whether or not you're allowed to give yourself permission, or whether or not you can be kind to yourself, etc. And if you're having some of those battles, all that vital energy you're directing towards essentially coping and compensating for that, you're not then putting towards the work to transform
yeah,
those challenges you are experiencing. So I think
yeah,
there's so much around that. And I'm glad you actually brought up the CBT side of things as well, because again, in my experiences, it's an area that can sometimes be a little bit tricky, because people can have negative experiences with things. It informs their decisions and perspectives later on, understandably, right? Nervous
mm,
system, threat filtration makes sense. However, that doesn't mean to say that there aren't modalities out there that could be really useful. And so if they're working with a practitioner such as yourself, who's also got the informed understanding of things like neurodiversity, so they can work in a neuroaffirming approach,
mm,
then you're able to meet them where they are and flex that around them, as opposed to expecting them to fit into that rigid system.
yeah,
I think that friction is really where
mm,
those modalities don't work for people quite so
yeah,
well. And that's again the system, the structure, or the person delivering it rather than the individual. So it's not a
yeah.
person failing, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think without going too much into therapy and therapy modalities, which I could talk about a lot, um, acceptance and compassion, those two words, and I absolutely agree, so important. But actually, there are two amazing modalities of therapy. There are loads others as well. Acceptance and commitment therapy and compassion focused therapy that actually are under that CBT umbrella of families. Um, but they are great. And I use sort of elements of both, sprinkle in some of both of those, but because they're helping to, kind of build those skills. And there was something else you said that I wanted to say something about that I had like a great thought probably, but it's gone, so I don't know. That's great.
Series two.
Um, is it going to come back?
It'll
Maybe.
come
Oh
back.
yes,
Oh, you
yes,
got it?
it's back, it's back.
Hey.
Um, yeah, and I just that you used the word internalize earlier, and I wanted to come back to that and to really, for anyone who's listening who feels that shame, feels like I should be able to do these things, and has internalized that sense, just to really say that that is so understandable if we think about our society and the messages that we get through school, through family, of like, this is what's normal, this is what you're supposed to be able to do, and we internalize that, and then we feel this, yeah,
Mm,
shame towards ourselves. And that's so understandable that we would get into that space, but we don't have to stay kind of trapped in that space. That's something that we can work on.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. That's a really beautiful distinction that I feel is so important for us to remember and to share is, we're never responsible for, let's say, the life circumstances we were born, sort of born into that led to us being in some of these situations. And it's not an either or, and we can absolutely find those ways, those spaces, those people, those, practices that can help us to not stay stuck there. Absolutely.
Mm,
I think that is a really, really key message, especially when it comes to sort of understanding some of those challenges you might have been experiencing, for what feels like forever. When you've got that understanding, so let's say RSD, for instance, I've had loads of people sort of say, in passing and things, oh, that's my RSD, full stop. And I'm like, okay, great. And then what? And
mm,
what will you do about that? Or, and, what are you doing, etc.
yeah.
Because with learnt responses, guess what? Through the same principles we've learnt those things, i.e., neuroplasticity, we can unlearn those things as well. And I think that's
Yeah.
where having some of those safe spaces with the right practitioners can really be, transformative in
Mm,
helping you to do that. Because yes, we can unlearn them. Also, yes, we probably will need some assistance in doing so because, like I said earlier, we don't know what we don't know. So
yeah.
I think changing that kind of perspective is a real challenge for people in our sort of area, in our industry, right? Because let's take a really abstract thought. Okay, so one that I often lean into is, if you were sort of bleeding out from a big wound and it was obviously on your person, you can't really administer that level of first aid, even if you're qualified. Yeah. So, but let's assume, okay, I know it's always a risk for us to assume, but let's presume that, average Joe is not going to have a really high level of trauma training. And so they're going to be bleeding out and go, oh no, I need a doctor. At least that's what we might hope most people would say. Oh, look, there is a big gaping wound, and I will really need to seek some medical attention if I would like to continue, being okay. And so then they would go and seek some medical care and they would go and see the right people. I guess it would be triage and maybe nurse and, maybe a specialist to stitch them up, whatever it is. But they would go and get that treatment. When it comes to the world of invisible differences, and again, I say that loosely because that's a whole different conversation that we can have, I'm sure. But when it comes to things that perhaps aren't as linear, it then suddenly becomes an individual responsibility. And there's some really interesting ties into things like the sort of development of capitalism, et cetera, that play into the history of ableism, the prejudice we're talking about here, which seeks to kind of displace that responsibility onto the individual rather than the systems.
Mm,
What we then see, like you were saying, is growing up, you're getting all these messages. Of course, we're going to find ourselves in a position where we feel we have to do all of this ourselves, yet we're stuck because we can't.
yeah. I think there's a whole other conversation about neoliberalism and systemic stuff, which very passionate about, but there's a whole other topic about that. And some of those factors. And I really love that sort of, yeah, the RSD, not full stop, and then. And I think also the same is true of with maybe a slightly different way, with like diagnosis and or like self-identification of going, now I know this thing about myself. That's like the first step. It's not like that, that's it now. It's like, so what does that actually mean for me? Because it can look so different for everyone. And also, so when I work with people and I try and do this for myself as well, this is kind of how I am, what I've learned, but also how my brain works and that kind of mix of learn and just me. And like, what are the where are the areas that not because society has said I should be a particular way, but for me, this is something I enjoy or want to do that I find difficult, but something I can maybe work on to make it feel more manageable or more comfortable. So it's the kind of and then what? And some things might be like, I don't care about that thing. I don't care if society says I should make eye contact or do whatever, or I don't want to do that thing. But some things, so I went to a gig last night, so I'm a bit tired. And that is something I love, but also something I find quite difficult, people in my personal space. And I know this is not, I wouldn't actually like this, but in some ways, like I've got my personal space. And if everyone else could just stay in their bubble of space, not move into mine, I know a gig where everyone doesn't move wouldn't actually work and would be boring, but there is a bit of me that like wants that because I've got my space and like I'm happy here and I'm at a distance that feels okay and so I can enjoy this without it being too overstimulating. But constantly I'm hyper vigilant of everyone else and people like move. I'm like, what are you doing? You pick your space and stay in it. Don't say that, but that's a bit of my internal stuff. And so I found ways of being able to enjoy that space. It might still be quite draining, but enjoy it and manage it. But you know, so I don't get right near the front. Sort of someone that feels comfortable. And um, so it's not just a this is something I can't do because it's difficult. It's a there are bits about this that are difficult, and which bits can I do something about? So where I stand, how I interact, and what bits can I think, okay, this is going to be tiring and training. So how can I prepare for it and recover from it so that actually I can kind of weather it well enough?
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And all of that is built on that really important piece we were just talking about in terms of, awareness, acceptance, and
Mm.
compassion in order for you to be able to find those solutions that do work for you. And that's beautiful. What a lovely story. Thank you for sharing that with me. I really resonate with so many of those areas. And I think that for me it reminds me of a fairly subtle yet really, really, again, transformative shift that we can try to embrace again through practice. And it's the sort of shift into, ooh, that's interesting. What's that trying to tell me? So I always say, get curious, not furious. I think one of my colleagues, Annie, said that to me a wee while ago, and it just really, really stuck with me because especially if we have things like RSD and challenges with emotional regulation, etc., it can be so easy to have, a overstimulating input, challenging scenario, sort of piece of information that is some way, shape, or form distressing. And for that to kind of create that barrier of going, oh no, RSD, well, that's where I end. And that can be, really, really tough and tricky for us to navigate. So I always encourage people in those moments to go, ooh, that's interesting. What's that trying to tell us?
Mm.
What is that batting up against that is making the thing really distressing? Is it sensory processing? Is it a limiting belief? Is it RSD? Is it your nervous system, responding to something that feels like a threat? So, what's the unmet need here?
Mm.
And how can we go about meeting that with a support structure, a strategy, a thing, a thought, whatever it is. It's always different for different people. What is this data trying to tell us?
Mm.
What can we do with that to make your experience less distressing, more authentic, more aligned, whatever it is we're trying to aim for, right? But
Yeah.
that real subtle shift and swap. And I mean, to be honest, it certainly changed my life when I sort of started realizing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something that's making me think about in therapy, that curiosity, that when we have like an emotional response to something, and often, and I also don't like sitting in that place. I'm like, no, yeah, I feel this thing, let's move on. But actually getting better for myself of going, all right, there is something really important about whatever this is. And sometimes it's to things you're like, why am I upset about that? Like, what's that? What is that about? And being really curious because there is something really important at this on a level that I don't have access to here, but my body is saying, whoa, there is something going on. And so actually, if we can be curious about it and kind of pause, we can learn a lot more about ourselves and about, what's going on. And also, sometimes that's then tricky. That comes up and like you're like, all right, I know this about myself now. Now I need to, well, I say need to, this is my internal dialogue. Now I want to, need to do something about it. And sometimes even the things I want to work on, I don't know if you can relate to this or with your clients you see. I know I want to do this thing. I know this is kind of what I'm working on. I don't want to do that today.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear that all the time. And I think I'll add here, and I'll be interested if you resonate with this. Just because I am a specialist, does not mean that I have all of this down on lock for myself. It is, in fact, the lived experience of having gone through it that allows for me to understand my clients on those multiple different levels and resonate with their experiences and connect with them through that in a deeper way than the sort of, coaching alone is able to.
Mm,
Now, that's not to say my stuff's coming into their experiences, it's just informing that understanding of where they might be. And so I can
mm,
hold that space and say, I hear and see you, and I really understand that. And when people are sort of, going through those experiences and, finding those different ways, sometimes one of those decisions might well be to decide not to deal with that thing. I mean,
mm,
my mind blew when my therapist first told me, like years ago, years and years ago now. And she said, deciding not to do something is also a decision. And I was like, I beg your pardon, what? Like chronic
mm,
overachiever, recovering people pleaser over here. What do you mean not doing something? I must be doing the do at all times, to have worth, to be whatever. But and now you're telling me
mm,
that I can decide not to do something, and that is an equally valid decision. Huh.
mm,
And so deciding not to do something is absolutely sometimes the thing that might work best for you. It's always interesting to think about, obviously, the sort of why underneath. Are we not doing the thing because it's uncomfortable and we don't want to deal with it and sit with it? Or are we deciding not to because we don't have the capacity right now, but we will later? You know,
yeah.
sounds a little bit healthier than the other. But that being said, it's a perfectly understandable decision. And it might be that, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the tools, it's not the right space, whatever it is.
Mm,
Being able to make that decision and know that that's an option can sometimes be so liberating for people because it kind of just creates a little bit more space for you to be able to breathe with those options as well. And that kind of reminds me of another phrase I like to say, especially in the coaching, because when it comes to coaching, a lot of people, I think, expect the coach to have the answers. And that's
mm,
really the design of coaching. I know a lot of people out there, because it's an unregulated space, probably are masquerading around as a coach and telling people what to do. But I can assure you that's not actually the design of coaching. And so when I'm asking questions, a lot of the time, especially at the start of someone's journey, the answer is I don't know. And so
mm,
I'm often finding myself saying, yep, that's okay. That's also an answer too. So maybe that's a good place to start, figuring out what we don't know so we can find the answers to filling in those gaps.
yeah.
And I think just being able to shift and reframe some of those moments can be really, really valuable for people who've grown up being told, they should be able to handle things themselves, or they should know all the answers, or, it's weak if you get help, or whatever it is that, might be running through that sort of, mindset or that belief. And those moments can be really powerful for people when they need to hear them.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you. That's lovely. Um, I had somewhere that I was going to go, but it's just completely wiped. Um, which
Happens all.
happens all the time. But I'm curious going back to RSD. So we've kind of talked a bit about what it is. We've talked about some of these things maybe that we can be curious about and kind of shifts. But I wonder, and obviously it's very unique and it's very understanding yourself and what goes on, for yourself. But are there any things that you generally find in terms of strategies or things that you kind of recommend people think about or maybe try out if this is something they're listening to this and going, absolutely, that is something that I find tricky.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Absolutely. So I'm glad that you already added the acknowledgement that, it is different for different people because you're absolutely right. And when I always get asked these questions on things like podcasts and interviews, I always have to explain that I know many strategies, but that does not mean that I will know your strategies. And that is exactly why you get to be in the driver's seat of something like coaching to figure that out.
Mm,
And if someone was coming to me at the start of a journey, for instance, around something like RSD, I'd be encouraging clarity probably as a first step. So, because it shows up differently for different people, get curious to get some clarity around how it's showing up for
mm,
you. Is it showing up in, avoidance of sitting with conflict, or are you, self-sabotaging yourself at work to avoid a promotion, or are you having panic attacks because you can't bear the thought of your annual appraisal? Are you having arguments every day at home? Are you exploding or imploding? What kinds of physical features come up for you? Heart rate, sweat, sort of, hypervigilance. How, from that, sort of physical and emotional perspective, are those features showing up in your life? Start there, because without that, we're kind of shooting in the dark when it comes to then actually figuring out the strategies. So I'll explain why. Because if, for instance, your RSD was showing up as chronic self-sabotaging in the workplace because you didn't want to you want the promotion, but you're scared of the potential pressure that might put on you, or the conflict that might then add because you've got to manage multiple teams, whatever it is, the strategies for that are going to most likely look very different to, let's say, if you're having conflict with your partner at home.
mm,
So let's figure out how that's showing up for you first before we can then figure out what, if anything, might help you around it. Then the second thing I'm going to do is always encourage people to go into this with a sort of beta testing mindset, right?
mm,
Experiment with that approach that nothing can be right or wrong. If a strategy doesn't work for you, that's not a personal failing. It just means that wasn't the right one in that right moment. That is okay. So
mm,
kind of go into it and experiment and say, oh, that worked. I'll do a little bit more of that, or maybe tweak it there. That didn't work. Okay, cool. If that gets thrown, I won't try that again for a while.
mm,
So coming into it with that kind of approach, that kind of curious experimental approach, can already relieve a lot of the pressure, especially for perfectionists who will constantly go into something like this and think, right, okay, I know RSD now, so I need to fix it. Why have I not completely resolved this overnight? Have I failed again? No, you haven't. Behavior change takes time. You
mm,
know that. You can explain the processes as to why behavior change takes time. So something like this did not build up overnight, and it will not be unbuilt overnight. And that is
mm.
okay. That is
Yeah.
so that's where I would start. And then in
Mm,
terms of, I suppose, you know, immediate kinds of things, I would be looking at ways to regulate your nervous system. So to get yourself out of those states of dysregulation and hyper awareness and hypo awareness. And so that again involves, again, knowing what your signs are to indicate when you're hitting a period of dysregulation that's going to take you either into hyper awareness or hypo awareness. So sort of, 10 out of 10, oh my goodness, the sky is falling, everything is red, is how I generally describe
mm,
that. And then a hypo-aware is, you're 0 out of 10, nothing in the tank, completely disconnected, detached, don't look at me, I've got nothing to give kind of thing. So
Mm.
hit those places, we know we've really got to bring ourselves back into sort of window of tolerance, if you will. And it's a
Hmm.
therapeutic exercise, hey. But essentially your regulated nervous system so that you feel grounded, reconnected, and you can access your executive functions, which you'll need to be able to do the next steps. Because when we become dysregulated, we're going to get overwhelmed and our brain will shut off our access to our executive functions as a
Mm.
survival response. And so, first and foremost, when we are experiencing anything like, overwhelm, shutdown, dysregulation, RSD flare up, in that moment, we always think, I've got to push through. I've got to push through, grit my teeth, cope with it, pretend I'm not experiencing it, whatever it is. It's actually in those moments where pause, take a moment, recognize what's happening, and then find something to help you regulate before
Mm.
they're taking those next steps. So I would say
Yeah.
so curiosity, clarity, compassion, regulation. That would be sort of my starter pack for you.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for those. And yeah, agree completely with that. And I think as we were talking, I think capacity was something that came up kind of earlier, but I think as well, even if you're like, yes, I've discovered my strategies that work for me. If your tolerance, if you think about that window of tolerance, if your tolerance is lower because you're unwell, you've not slept while you're on your period or it's coming and whatever, that reduces your capacity. So if you're like, why is this not working this week? It normally works. It could be that actually if our capacity is lower, we are more affected by things. And I think that's important to remember as well. And I work in a similar way, that kind of curious and like this creative discovery, and that we're testing stuff out. And actually, even if something doesn't work, that's useful information. What didn't I like about it? What didn't work? How was I feeling? And really we're refining it. And so anyway, if something kind of works a bit, we can think like, okay, so what was the stuff that did work? What was the bit that's missing? And then can we tweak it? Can we tweak it? Can we personalize it? Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm so, so glad that you brought that up because that is another really important thing, especially for, the sort of perfectionists, the retired, gifted, and talented among us, who again often have that immense level of self-imposed pressure to be like, I absolutely have to be able to do this. And once I found the strategies, they must always work for me no matter what. When actually that capacity piece is such a valuable factor to really consider. Fluctuations in hormones, absolutely.
Mm.
Everybody has a cycle. Every single person on this planet has a cycle, which has variations within it that because of those variations, we will see certain changes happen. There is a brilliant, highly recommend her coming on this podcast, specialist called Samantha Garstin. Oh my goodness, she is just a fountain of knowledge in terms of cycles and hormones and
Mm.
how that interacts with neurodivergent experiences. And I learn so much from her every time we speak. But she talks about that in terms of the cyclical framework that she
Mm.
develops with clients to help them understand those different variations. And within that world, obviously, you've got hormones, you've got things like nutrition, like you say, sleep, rest as well, in general, is another big
Mm.
one, right? Everyone's mind is always blown when I say there's more than one type of rest. They say, what do you mean? What do you mean there's more than one type of rest? There's more than one type of rest.
Yeah.
Like, oh. And so I say, well, if we take a general sort of, I guess, widely universally agreed sort of look at this, we can pretty much define roughly 7 different types of rest.
Mm.
And you can sort of see the cogs turning. As you say, so you're pinning your expectations of a strategy to work perfectly on 2 hours of sleep, a dusty cracker, some stale water, without thinking about the impact that that might be having on your capacity. And they're like, oh,
Mm.
you kind of almost
Yeah.
see that wash of like, relief when they realize they can give themselves permission
Yeah.
to stop giving themselves a hard time over this. When we add that context,
Yeah. I
completely
think
changes.
I've I guess let's say a helpful little checklist, not in any formal way, a checklist. But for myself in the 7 stages of rest is something when we've done group programs, we talk about and we have this like sheet where people can actually think, okay, so like, oh, what do I do or what might I want to try in this area? My little checklist, if I'm feeling off in some way, I would think like, how's my sleep been? Where often actually, if particularly if I'm craving things, I check my period tracker first because often it's like where am I or I'm feeling particularly sensitive and emotional. That's my first go-to often, like where am I in my cycle? Because I know that there are times when I am more sensitive. Sleep. Um, and then like often stress is a big thing for me, like how much I've got going on that I'm having to hold. Because I do lots and lots of different things, there is a real executive functioning toll of that and that context shifting, which also I really need because I'm just doing the same thing. I get really intolerably bored. So there's an element of I need it, but also it's difficult. So I have this little check-in of those things. And then often when you've done a couple, you're like, all right, okay, it's making sense now. But actually, even for my partner, to be like, has he slept? Has he eaten? Has he had coffee? If there's something, because like you said, we all have cycles, we all have different things that actually really will affect our ability to tolerate things, people, tasks, or to be able to kind of function. I don't know, in whatever way we're trying to. And so actually, that's quite a helpful thing. Again, get curious for yourself. What are my things that I notice I'm particularly affected by? And then almost run through them. And actually, if you're ticking off a couple, you can go, okay, all right, maybe it's a time for some self-compassion now because my window is small. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Exactly that. Exactly that. And it's such a an eye-opening process to go through, whether or not it's that mental checklist, whether or not it's a sort of physical visual one, whether or not it's structured questions, however it needs to look, 'cause it's different for different people, but just giving yourself that moment to check in so that you can understand the context of what's going on and how that impacts and influences your capacity is really, really useful for people. And again, not something that our current structures, societies, and systems are really built to do. Everything is built pretty much reactively, crisis management, fight fires, deal with the emergencies, reflect later, deal with the stuff in front of us, think about it after, prioritize everything else and everyone else around us, sleep when you're dead. So when
Mm.
you're getting all of these messages all of the time, of course you're going to really struggle to be able to kind of almost separate was it the wood from the trees, the weird phrase?
Yes.
Yeah, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But sort of get that clarity piece there, and that's really,
Yeah.
really important for people. And you were going to say you said something that really, really sparked a thought nugget for me. Now it's my turn to forget. Nope, it's gone. I'm sure it might come back at some point.
Yeah. Well, when you were saying that kind of when we're in the firefighting mode, and this is something that I'll often say to people when we're thinking about emotional regulation, communication, and in relationships and like conflict, and the time to think, what is the strategy I can use, is not when it's in crisis. It's before and maybe after like a crisis, if something's not worked, then we update it. But to think, what are some things I might try? Because when we're in that mode, we are not in our creative thinking, logical space. And even that the act of being able to remember, hey, I've got a list of things I can try. That is still a task in itself, possibly. But if you've at least got something that you can think, okay, let me try, or potentially someone, a person that you trust who's kind of supportive, who actually, if you're, feeling really overwhelmed, dysregulated, might be like, hey, have you checked your list? Haven't you got that list of things? Have you tried one of those? And because sometimes we need that sort of support as well.
Mm.
But yeah, the time to think about these things is not when you're in that crisis mode. It's when you're calm and things feel okay, when you maybe feel like I don't even need a list. That's the that's the time to maybe think about. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's another really, really good point because when I I'm exploring this, let's say in a coaching or a training capacity, I get that a lot, sort of, but how is this going to help me in the moment? Or, how am I going to remember the thing? And again, my sort of general guide points make so you need a variety. And this is why, I sort of always encourage that toolbox per se, right? Because you've got different stages, and so therefore you'll need different things in those various stages. So you've got the sort of
Mm.
prep work, which helps to reduce the risks, as it were, of those things happening. You've got the recovery, the post, so after the thing has happened, how you are, sort of processing, learning from, recovering from the experience. And then you've also got that bit in the middle. And when we're at that bit in the middle, the last thing you want is a complex multi-step process that you have to remember. And I'll give you an example actually of one that sort of through a lived experience over time I've sort of finally found a way that actually works for me. So there's a very well-known grounding technique, the 5 4 3 2 1, right?
Hmm.
Now, I have executive functioning challenges as it is. When I am very dysregulated in the moment, the perfectionist comes out at me and I'm going, is it 5 things I can see or 4 things I can see and 5 things I can hear? Is it 2 things I can taste or one? And how many things am I touching? And it actually makes me more stressed thinking about
Mm.
getting it right than it does actually using the thing to ground and regulate myself. And I like being able to use that as a lived experience example because I know it's been very validating for a lot of people in the past. And so I say, make whatever you need in the middle bit as simple and as accessible as possible, because that last thing you need is to try and have that extra functioning, extra cognitive, functioning load
Yeah.
in that moment. So make it as simple as it can be. So
Yeah.
if I'm in that moment and I think 5 things, I'm not thinking 5 things from my senses. The first one I'll do is 5 calming colors I can see, and I'll pick my favorite colors and I'll just go around the room, pick the colors. Okay, green, for instance, and then I'll check in. No, I still feel a bit dysregulated. Okay, right, now yellow. Okay, yeah, fine. Blue. And I just pick the colors that kind of come to me in the moment that I think I need to
Mm.
kind of think about or connect with to feel a bit calmer. Then I can almost feel things coming back online, that sort of visions getting wider again. I'm getting less panicky. My breathing's starting to become more regulated. Then I can check in and say, right, am I ready to reconnect with the rest of my senses? Let's see what that looks like. And, so then I can develop it out from there. But if you need to strip something back into a one-step thing for it to feel
Mm.
simple and accessible in that moment, give yourself permission to do that. You don't need to,
Yeah.
there's not a perfect strategy.
No. And I think that's a great example because you've realized for yourself this is, my tendency. So actually this is why it's not going to be helpful. And I think also that you've kind of picked a sense, and I think that's something I always find really interesting doing kind of grounding or mindfulness stuff, that I think we all have different senses that we are drawn to that maybe are more dominant for us. So I don't have a mind's eye, so aphantasia. So when people try and visualize, I don't see anything. That's not helpful. Visualize is nice, and I'll think about it. I don't see it. And so I often, so like tactile can be good, but often sound, like a tuning into all the different sounds I can hear. That's something that is, depends where you are, but particularly relaxing. And the first time I did that was sat in this wood. There were birds singing, and then it started raining on this canvas, and I could hear the sound like almost like moving. And it was so interesting just being able to tune in. And I find that helpful because my mind has something to do. It has, and I think, when if it's racing, if we give it a different task, that can help us to
Yeah.
calm down.
That sounds
Yeah.
like a beautiful experience. I mean, I have quite a vivid imagination, so I'm like already picturing you there and, imagining that experience for you. That sounds beautiful. And
Mm.
that's actually a really interesting point that you brought up. Thank you for sharing your lived experience around aphantasia. Again, that's something that not many people are aware about. So when you are, for instance, as a practitioner, especially, supporting people through developing stuff that works for them, you've got to know these kinds of things. I mean, you're not going to know everything, of course, but
Mm.
give yourself, again, that professional curiosity to make sure that you understand each of your clients so that you are, tailoring things to what will work for them. I've met so many, sort of coaches, for instance, that will, do strong visualization exercises, for instance, and that's not going to be accessible or useful for people who, let's say, experience aphantasia, for instance.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have that
Yeah.
information.
So I do some training on just neurodiversity and what it is as a concept. And I talk a bit about neurodivergence, but just this idea that all our minds are different. And spoiler, I always start it to get people to really know what it is. I don't know if you've seen this. You ask people to imagine an apple,
Yeah.
and it's a 1 to 5, and like 1 is like a crystal clear apple, and 5 is nothing. And then ask people to share. And usually there's a mix. Sometimes there's other fives like me who are like nothing. And then some people are like 1, or like I couldn't decide what color. And then when you say like I had this, and this is just so simple to show our brains function and they process the world differently, and to really get people to go, wow. And it's so simple, but it's so effective for people to go, I didn't realize. And I the fact that you can see a full apple, I'm like, where, like, that's my big question. Where do you see it? What? I don't even, can't even comprehend it. It's so different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so it is really, and so also actually, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, well, I've tried to do this thing and it just doesn't work for me. And I'm like, why doesn't it work? What's wrong with me? Maybe it's just, you know, it's a 1 and you're a 5 or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And you just process differently. No more, no less. Difference does not equate deficit.
Yeah.
Be different. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. I'm very conscious of the time. And it's been we just breezed through. It's been a fascinating conversation. So Beth, I wonder if you've got a final thought about RSD or anything that we've talked about that you wanted to share.
Ooh, so many, so many. Asking a strong verbal processor an open-ended question like that is always a nice brain tingling challenge. What would I like to say? One of the things I find myself saying the most, there is a very, very, very big difference between having a difficult time and being a difficult person.
Mm,
And I am certain that I have never met anybody in my world who has woken up one day and said, I can't wait to be a difficult person. I can't wait to be a pain in somebody's butt, especially someone I care about, right? Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm sure it might do. But the point of what I'm trying to say there is
mm,
the majority of the time, it's people having a difficult time. And that within the context of RSD is especially important because RSD can be very spiky for both ourselves and for the people around us. And so when we're in the thick of those moments, if there is a point at which that thought comes to you and gives you permission to be kinder to yourself and to those around you, that might just help give you a little bit more permission to kind of, take some of that shame, that overwhelm, that stress, that whatever it is, that's inflaming the situation, so that you can practice some self-compassion and find some ways to reflect and move through it with some learning for
mm,
next time. But yeah, big difference between having a difficult time and being a difficult person. And the likelihood is that you're probably having a difficult time either yourself or having a difficult time with someone else who's having a difficult time. And so, again, when you think about it in that context, two people having a difficult time rather than being difficult changes
yeah,
the mindset.
yeah. No, I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today and for everything you shared. I really loved our
Thank
conversation.
you for having me. It's been a
Cool.
fantastic conversation. I can't believe the time went so quickly
I
already. How wild.
know.
Thank you so much for being such a wonderful host. It was a great
Oh, thank
conversation.
you. Yeah. Oh, lovely. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.